Welcome to the 16th Galway Film Fleadh pitching competition. It's really true. We started in 2005 in the Cinemobile. But this year it's very different because we do it virtually. We got long hair. We went through strange times. But I hope that this pitching competition is as entertaining and funny and interesting like it was in the last years. My name is Ralph Christians. I'm a filmmaker. I've done a hell of a lot of films in animation and in live action. I lived in Iceland, I lived in Ireland. I operated from small countries, from the Nordic countries, from Ireland. It's a small country in this sense. And because of that, I always had to find money abroad, and this means I had to pitch. So what we are doing here is something you can use in your film life, because on a national level you have to pitch to RTE or to the Irish Screen or to the RAP Fund, and on the international side you have to pitch to distributors, broadcasters, co-producers, and you have to do it in a convincing way. People have to see that you have some fire in your eyes for your project. The Galway Film Fleadh pitching session has always been interesting to see what young talents and upcoming people in our industry, what stories they want to tell. And sometimes, quite often, some of the pitches also have been turned into films. For example, last year's winner, Roisin Jones, she won a development loan from Irish Screen, and she also receives professional guidance by a script editor, and we hope that her project will take off. I personally haven't read the submissions, and the jury, which I will introduce shortly, has also not read the submission, so we have no prejudices and we focus on the pitches, which will be 90 seconds long. And it's indeed, we call it elevator pitch because like in America, if you meet a producer in a skyscraper, you have maybe 90 seconds to tell him what your project would be. Also, there are a lot of Americans, we don't want to go there, who don't have an attention span of more than 90 seconds. I introduce the jury to you. There is, first of all, Mary Kate O'Flanagan. She has been on the jury before, and she's an award-winning writer and story consultant, and she works across Europe. She works in US, in UK, and also in South Africa. And together with her sister Rachel, she gives training in storytelling skills for professionals in our industry. On the other side, she is Ireland's first Grand Slam champion storyteller at the Moth in New York and also at the Moth in Los Angeles and the Dublin Story Slam. So today she's listening to stories, and I'm sure sometimes comes also a bit of her storytelling skills will come through. Sarah Dillon is very well known in the industry. She is there for more than 10 years. In 2018, she was appointed development manager of the RAP Fund in the west of Ireland, based in Galway. And before that, she was a production and development executive at the Irish Film Board, now Irish Screen. And she was across the full slate of projects of the Film Board, across feature films, television, animation, and documentaries. Owen O'Farlane, he started in factual television, then he worked for Samson Film, developed and produced more than 12 films with them. One quite acclaimed one is A Dark Song, which featured in the Fantastic Fest in the London Film Fest in Sitges near Barcelona. They have a beautiful, fantastic film festival there, and many others. And the film was also released in UK and US in 2017. 2 years earlier, in 2015, he moved to London and works there still as an independent development producer and also head of film for the finance and production company Sharp House. So we have a very good mixture of people as judges. And now we come to the first contestant. The jury will ask after every pitch, they will ask questions or give statements, and they have a few minutes for this. The first contestant is Emmett McMullen. He's from Newtown Abbey, and he writes in his submission, Newtown Abbey, United Kingdom. I think he's right, that's a sovereign state, but it's Northern Ireland. And he has written 4 short films, which he also produced and directed, and he has written 3 complete feature scripts. His project title today is Insurrection. It's a historical drama, and he says in the logline that his hero's actions would unite a country. His words would change the world if. He will now answer the if. Emmett, will you please start?
Thank you. Adventure, humanitarian, revolutionary, hero, traitor. Who was Roger Casement? Insurrection is the incredible true story of Roger Casement, a diplomat and knighthood of the British Empire, later executed as a traitor for his role in Ireland's Easter Rising of 1916. The film begins with Roger Casement awaiting trial in the Tower of London, the last of the surviving leaders of the Rising. Although Roger is the only leader permitted at trial, he faces a similar fate. It is here Roger meets John Ebernaut, a British Army major assigned to sketch the condemned man. What starts as 2 enemies forced together forms into mutual respect, as Roger talks about the events which led him to rebellion against the empire he once served. Roger's trial is one of the first show trials of the 20th century that captured headlines across the world. During the high-profile trial, the British Home Office leaked Roger's alleged black diaries to the press, indicating a promiscuous and then illegal gay lifestyle. The leak was not only a character assassination intended to condemn Roger to execution, but to destroy his legacy. As the verdict nears and public opinion turns against Roger, he must find the courage and strength to accept his fate and deliver one last rousing speech. Insurrection fuses courtroom drama, character study of a man not only fighting for his life, but fighting to discover his place in the world. The oppression he faced, the personal discrimination he suffered, are still as present today as they were then. A film in the mould of In the Name of the Father and Breaker Morant. Roger was a complex man, a misunderstood man, but mostly a largely forgotten man. It's time to tell the world his story.
This was very well timed.
Yes, on the button.
Sarah, will you start and tell me what you think or what questions you have?
Oh, Ralph, you're going to put me in the hot seat like Emmett up first. Firstly, yep. Emmett, well done for a good, very great pitch. It's never easy to go first. Roger Casement's story is one that I'm quite familiar with. I think I've seen a couple of documentaries about it. What made you choose to take the angle of a courtroom drama?
Well, basically, whenever we researched into Roger Casement's life, you can make 3 films really to tell the true story. But we thought that in terms of drama, the court case was really where we should feature the film. Interestingly enough, John Ebernaut was actually a true person who actually did, sketched Roger before he went on trial. So really, we're telling the story through John Ebernaut's eyes. So we just thought that was a good link into the, what made Roger the person he was, etc. So we just felt that the courtroom scene would tell really well with flashbacks, going back to show the few events that really shaped, like I was saying, what turned him from a member of the British Empire to rebelling against it.
Very good.
Okay. Mary Kate.
Oh,
Sorry, we can't fix the...
I have to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Great work, Emmett. Like, that was really well done. And again, I think like most Irish people have some idea of the story of Roger Casement, but a wider audience doesn't, and that's who you're making it for. So it's really well overdue. So fantastic that you're going to do that. I thought you did a great job. It was a good idea to compare it to other films like Breaker Morant and In the Name of the Father, like, because I immediately think, oh, the courtroom drama is going to break out into loads of action. You said something about how, like, the plan of, you know, the empire was to destroy his legacy, and to some extent that worked. So I think you could say at the end, like, part of what your project's going to do is restore his legacy, like the Alan Turing project did. You know, there was this miscarriage of justice. So yeah, your delivery felt a tiny bit. I mean, I know you were up against the clock and you were the first one. Were you reading it?
Yes, I just got just the notes to the side. So yeah, I was just I was practicing all day to get it right, but just the last time I done it, I messed up in a few words. So yeah, I do have it on a split screen.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine, and it did really well, and you got so much across in 90 seconds, but you might have connected a little bit better if it was a tiny bit more conversational, you know, but
Yeah.
it will be the next time you do it in, you know, for real, to a real producer. You know, it would be better to stumble over a couple of words and be more chatty, I think, but it's a great pitch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, but we see also it's a difference if you have 100 or 150 people in the room in the Fleadh, or if you do it virtually. I mean, now you can feel how it is for a football player when you have this empty stadium and you have to perform. Owen, what's your opinion?
Hey Emmett, how's it going? Yeah, firstly, well done for getting across the line and getting it done on time and being the first one. It's always tough. I mean, I think it's an interesting project. I mean, I think Irish history has so many great historical figures that haven't been kind of mined properly for drama. And what I have for you is a question, essentially, which is where is the core drama of this story? Is it going to be about the flashbacks, and is that general arc going to occur across various points in time, or is the real drama about what's going to happen in the court case? Because what I need to know is it really a court case drama, or is that just a framing device to tell Roger's life?
Well, it's kind of a mix, really. I think Roger was probably one of the most complex characters I think I've ever researched or heard about as well. So I think with the court case itself, that's whenever his, I suppose, his private life was brought into the public fold. So for me to sort of have a film that you know, where the private life is discussed, I have to show where did it resonate from, which is why the flashbacks are told. Obviously, the flashbacks are a great chance of showing and not telling as well. Instead of, I mean, I've read the transcripts through the court case and out there, so it's trying to really summarize something that's going to be, I suppose, entertaining. So that's why I need to kind of show the flashbacks. I think they work really well on how they interact with the court case itself. So I'm probably on about my 6th draft at the minute, and we've had really good feedback regarding the actual structure and tone of it. So we have.
Great. And are those flashbacks going to kind of show the scale of the world in a kind of a, I suppose, a Michael Collins-esque kind of way?
The early draft actually focused a lot of his time in Africa, but I suppose, you know, have to be realistic with budgets as well. I don't think we can have elephants in it. So really what I'm trying to do with the script now is it's kind of like a character study of Roger himself. He was so complex, so interesting. So it's not really focused around the events of the time, but more about his personal relationships with those closest to him. Mm-hmm. And it does give an indication of, I mean, the first flashback is Ireland 1904 to 1906. And that was really the start of where the IRB really reshaped. And that was really the foundations for the 1916 Rising.
Great.
Thank you very much, Emmett. This was a good start into our pitching. And now we come to the second contestant. It's Stephen Murphy. He joins us from Vancouver in Canada. He has written live action and stop motion short films. He did music videos, he did video concepts, and he developed also and co-directed a film called The Light of Day, which premiered at the Galway Film Fleadh 6 years ago. He's also the writer of an educational young people's web series. His project titled is The Follies of Herbert Lane. His genre is a historical drama. And it's about a woman and her husband who open a small theater in Bohemian Dublin in the 50s, in the 1950s, where they challenged the theatrical and the social conventions of the day. We look forward to hear your ideas, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time to listen to my pitch. The name of my screenplay is The Follies of Herbert Lane. This is a story that I've written over the last 2 years on and off while working here in Vancouver in the film industry. This is a story I'd like to direct myself, so I'm really looking for a producer to help get it made. The story is based on the true story of the Pike Theatre and the married couple who ran it together, Carolyn Swift and Alan Simpson. So the story begins in 1953, it's opening night, and Carolyn discovers her husband in the arms of another woman. So this is a disaster, she's distraught. She throws herself into her work, ends up discovering a little known playwright by the name of Brendan Behan. Now, Brendan's a bit of a wild man, a bit of a drinker, but they end up forming an unlikely friendship, and together they bring his play, The Quare Fellow, to the stage for the first time. Brendan soon goes on to betray this trust by selling the rights of the play behind her back for beer money. Later, while staging a Tennessee Williams play by the name of The Rose Tattoo, some confusion over an invisible condom leads to Alan being arrested and the rest of the cast and crew of the play being threatened with arrest if the show continues. So things look bad for the theater until a group of protesters gather outside the theater to obstruct the arrest. And at the head of this group of protesters is Brendan Behan, the man himself, the living, breathing soul of 1950s Dublin Bohemia.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mary Kate, will you start?
I must unmute. I don't want to interrupt any of the writers. Bang up job, Stephen. That was really fantastic. Like really beautifully done. You just have to say Brendan Behan and we're all in, right? Again, maybe not as well known as he could be, like Roger Casement outside of Ireland. So, these are stories that, definitely the wider world, we have them to share with them. But I thought you did a beautiful job of setting the scene. And I love this idea that, like, we think of 1950s Ireland as everybody having been super conventional and completely repressed, but that wasn't the case. There are always bohemians and oddbods. And, I came up through theatre, and the story of the Rose Tattoo is just still famous lore, isn't it? Like, I came up, in the 80s, and, you're obviously a lot younger than that, but like the path that they forged is really interesting. But I also thought you did a great job of putting all the interpersonal drama right in there, and you did something beautiful, which is you pitched the premise and not the plot. And I always love when someone does that. Like, it's just like, really great work. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Owen, what's your opinion?
Hey, Stephen, how's it going? Again, very good pitch, very clear, really confident. And yes, Brendan Behan again, another really interesting character. Why do you want to tell this story?
Well, so many reasons, but for me, I've just always been really fascinated about this concept of Bohemia. These small kind of clusters of people who come together and create something out of nothing. It's just fascinating. Like I've always been fascinated by like the Lost Generation in Paris or like Greenwich Village in the 1960s. So when I kind of heard this story about what they called Bagatonia, which was the Bohemian scene in post-war Dublin, it's just this kind of mix of people is so unique and so fascinating and so distinctly Irish as well. Like at this time, you would have had pubs in Dublin would have writers and painters and playwrights mixing with ex-IRA men who are just out of prison, people dodging the draft out of Britain, American GIs over in university. And I think the work that was created in this era really shone through in just how diverse Dublin was in this time. It's just something I'm fascinated by. I love the whole feel of the theater, and those are the kind of driving forces. But also the story is quite significant, I feel, for Irish culture. Like it's the story of the first time the government directly intervenes to censor a work of theater in Ireland. So I feel like it just feels like an essential story that we really should tell about Ireland, and particularly these characters, Carolyn and Alan, who were they're kind of outsiders in a group of outsiders in a way, because Carolyn was a Jewish lady from London working in a predominantly Protestant industry in the theater in a very increasingly Catholic country. So yeah, those are some of the reasons.
I think they're great reasons. I think maybe one or two of them could be built into your pitch, especially the significance of the story and why we should care about that. So I would consider inserting that in a little bit somewhere in those 90 seconds.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Owen. And Sarah, now it's your turn.
Well, Cahorchka, Stephen, I think that was a great pitch. You certainly managed to give us a great sense of the world, the ambition that you have for it, the colour, the diversity there. So that's really exciting, actually, to have a sense of the world of a film just from 90 seconds. And you have a lot of really colourful characters in there as well. Some we know less. You can play around with our perceptions of who Behan was, or even those characters, Carolyn and Alan. I suppose what I wanted to ask you is, like, as is the film, and a note for me is, like, this could expand out into a TV series. It's got this sense of a returnable world, and you've got so many great moments within it. I could see it playing as a longer piece. But for me, in the film, is it Carolyn's story? And if so, what is her journey within the story? Again, because you mentioned quite a few characters, I just wanted to get to the hub of whose POV it is from.
Okay, so yeah, it's a feature film. The script's actually written, but yeah, it's Carolyn's POV, so she's the main character. So it opens with us kind of following her day as the theater's about to open for the first time, and she's managing everybody. She's making sure everybody's comfortable and they got everything they need. And then she discovers her husband's infidelity, and this kind of leads her on a sort of separate journey within the theater. The two of them stay in the theater, but they continue. She goes kind of off in her own direction. She doesn't so much look for acceptance from Alan or permission from Alan to pursue Brendan specifically. And we really follow as she kind of navigates this bohemian world that, although she loves the theater, she's really challenging her own views of like what it means to be a married woman, what it means to be in a faithful relationship, what it means to create. So we follow that journey, and then as things are kind of coming to a head, this whole case with the rose tattoo and the censorship debacle occurs, and it kind of, while it seems like everything is going to kind of go one way, everything ends up, they have to kind of, Alan and Caroline kind of have to reunite in the face of this major public kind of onslaught from the press and the government. So yeah, it's very much Carolyn's journey. She's the main protagonist, and yeah, that's where the drama is. It's just in her struggle to kind of self-realize her creative and romantic goals.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's very interesting, because nowadays we talk about that everybody is leaving the countryside and wants to live in the capitals. It's everywhere. People move into the cities. But when I think about Heinrich Böll's diaries, written also in the 50s, about people on the Achill Islands, this must have been very much a different life there from what you tell us what happened in Dublin, in this bohemian scene. Now we come to the third contestant. That's Alice McDowell. She's from Galway, and she is a documentary filmmaker. She has produced and directed 10 plus documentaries, and she now wants to tell us something, that the world grows warmer, and ravaged by drought and devastating wildfires, and we are paralyzed, disillusioned by political apathy and inaction. And she's moving through multiple countries in her project, cultures and communities. This film captures an eclectic anthology of rainmaking rituals, she says. It's called Rain Song, and it's her first feature documentary. Alice.
Thank you, Ralph. Remember when Australia was on fire? Apocalyptic scenes, a brutal testimony to the climate crisis and the fragility of our natural world. I watched from afar, helpless as the blaze got closer and closer to my grandparents' home in New South Wales. And it was in this moment that an idea I've been brewing for some time not only became timely and relevant, but for me became overwhelmingly urgent. And that's a feature documentary, a cinematic ode to rain, and a cinematic ode to the human act of rainmaking. From the waterfalls on the White Nile of Uganda, where rainbows are worshipped as links to the heavens that make the rain, to rural Mexico, where during the planting season, women engage in ceremonious rounds of fist fighting, blood for rain, and to India, where two frogs are married in a traditional Hindu wedding ceremony in a bid to please the rain gods. All over the world, humans have always called the rain with song, dance, prayer, and ceremony, and by weaving together a rich and diverse collection of these rituals, this song becomes a cinematic prayer and a message of healing for a world on fire. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Alice, Owen, will you start this time?
Hey Alice, how's it going? Thanks very much for that. It was quite an interesting pitch and very unique idea for a documentary. It's got a very distinct, I suppose, premise, but also I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly the way you presented it made it feel like quite a kind of a silent observational documentary, a little bit like Baraka and those documentaries which I can't pronounce. So is that the intention? Is it's supposed to be very observant and really just a visual experience of how these cultures kind of deal with the weather? And finally, one last question: why, like, can someone please stop the rainmakers in Ireland, because it's like ridiculous?
Interestingly, I do see Ireland as having a role in this, the Irish voice having a role in this documentary, almost as a thread to weave all these different stories together. But ultimately, it's a story, a global story that we're all a part of. So basically, yes, observational documentary is where I'm most passionate about. And I would see these as kind of small observational vignettes where we have a small story going on, but it is very much kind of drawing people into the experience in an observational way. And yeah, it's funny to think of, like, why on earth would you make this in Ireland? Because we certainly don't need any rainmaking rituals here. But I kind of like the idea of the Irish voice having this kind of being infused with the rain. And even if you look at all the poetry and literature and language, I mean, I was looking at words and phrases as Gaeilge, and there are hundreds of them to describe different types of rain. And I see that as a way to kind of narrate the story in a very creative way and link all these different kind of vignettes together.
Great, thank you.
Sarah?
Hi, Alice, how are you? Congratulations. I think it really potentially be quite a quirky sell in terms of a documentary with a very universal language and appeal, which is always something you look for with a feature documentary, and also quite timely, obviously, with what is going on environmentally right now. So you've hit on something quite perfect there, maybe, and zeitgeisty, which is really great. Just to pick up on something that Owen said, I do think just in your pitch, it would be helpful maybe to have one or two comp titles, just to kind of give us a sense of your approach and your visual world. Is it a, you know, something even like Henry Glassy, which Pat Collins is just about to show up the flower, that just to kind of give us a sense of where you want to go with this as a filmmaker. And again, it just really helps us then to kind of imagine the film you're trying to tell. I mean, I think you may have answered my question actually in your response to Owen, but I was just going to ask you about your approach. Is this going to be, you know, a narrative, a voiceover led documentary? Will it involve interviews, or have you kind of thought through the kind of structure of it?
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned, I think Owen mentioned Baraka, and of course there are some similarities in this kind of global story about humanity, definitely. But I guess one of the cinematic references I'd take is a film by Tony Gatliff. I don't know if you know Gadjo Dillo, which is the story of Roma music traveling through different countries. And they are short observational standalone vignettes, but they're very nicely woven into each other, and there is this kind of journey. So I would see it in a similar sense, that there'd be kind of like a parallel narrative, visually telling the story of the world coming to this state of crisis that kind of weaves them together. And then the added thing of a bit of voiceover, but more in a poetic sense, using probably a lot of the Irish language.
Very interesting. Well, look, I said it sounds very interesting. Try to sell a region where you get 4 seasons in 2 hours. It's the one thing I say to people when they come west. We can't guarantee the weather, but it sounds very interesting. So thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Sarah and Mary-Kate.
Hi, Alice. That was just fantastic. Really, you did a fantastic job. And you know, the one thing, like, I know when I've heard a good pitch, when I'm like, I want to actually sit down and have a coffee with you now and ask you a bunch of questions, you know. You know, and I thought of lots of things. One is, I should just, in case you don't know, in Botswana, Pula means rain, and instead of hooray, hooray, they say Pula, 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 but it's also the name of their currency, you know. And I have an African friend who moved here when he was a kid, and he was like, why do Irish people not like the rain in my country? You know, we have a festival and there's rain. So I think it's really interesting to have an Irish perspective on this story. And I think there are ways of putting like drama in. I thought it was very interesting, brave, interesting, resonant, that you said it's a kind of a prayer. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is like, what difference does it make when people approach a subject with faith instead of fear? So, you know, we could say it's a superstition, and maybe we don't believe that the rain gods respond to the prayers of people in Mexico. But how does it change how we interact with the earth and with our crops, and, you know, with all of those things, if we, you know, have faith instead of fear? Like, so how do rituals change us? I think is a really interesting question. I have just one question for you. It is cinematic. It's really cinematic. And I could imagine loving to go to the cinema and give myself up to something like this for 90 minutes or 2 hours. Do you think people will watch it on Netflix on a smaller screen?
I mean, I hope so. I think most, I mean, so many of us do watch really cinematic documentaries on our small, which are sometimes very big screens. I mean, like, of course, just to go for that cinematic look, and hope that it does have a life on the small screen, because it is cinematic, but it's also, as you said, like the whole crux of this film. It is about rituals, and it's not about whether they work or not, like individually. It's about that human, that kind of deeply human thing and what we're kind of losing in terms of listening to our environment and seeing what's happening and responding in a collective way. So it's more about that. So I hope it resonates not only on a big cinematic level, but on a kind of heart level.
Well, the other thing I give you a big thumbs up for, Alice, is you've taken a dreary and dour subject and gave us a really uplifting pitch. So, you know, well done. Thank you.
Well, I'm not Irish. I am Australian. I'm a rain refugee because I grew up in the droughts. I've been here 10 years and I still love the rain.
Thank you very much, Alice. I strongly believe that it has a chance on platforms like Netflix, and I think time is anyway changing, since not only since Corona, that people are not saying anymore, you are only working for television, but I'm a filmmaker. I think on television, you will have the audience. And that's the important thing for a project like this. Thank you very much. We come to the fourth contestant, Conor Dowling from Bray. He has written TV pilots and numerous shorts, and he has also written stuff for stand-up comedy, but he's not presenting a comedy. He's presenting a psychological thriller. He wrote and directed also the short thriller Nisha, which won the Judges Award at Clone's 48-Hour Film Festival. And his project today is called The Chosen. And the logline is, when her twin sister goes missing, investigative journalist Moya launches a true crime podcast which traces her sister's whereabouts to a mysterious Irish cult. Conor, we are very excited to hear what you tell us.
Thank you. Have you ever heard the expression, you really get to know someone after they go missing? In this tense psychological limited series, Moya learns disturbing secrets about her estranged twin sister, Freya. Frustrated with the police search, journalist Moya launches an investigative podcast to find answers. Battling her own demons, Moya is the only person left who cares about her unstable sister's whereabouts. When she connects Freya to an infamous cult in the west of Ireland, she must infiltrate them while secretly recording them in their secluded country mansion. They accept and admire her and eventually worship her just like they did with her visionary sister. Still no sign of Freya. Moya slips deeper into the cult's seductive grip in a drug-fueled haze of sex, sinister rituals, and betrayal. When police discover a body with Freya's description and DNA, it's an obvious suicide, case closed. But something doesn't feel right to Moya. A shocking twist reveals that Freya faked her own death to escape the cult, but soon the two sisters will face each other one last time. With complex characters and a rich cinematic atmosphere, audiences of The Chosen love gripping HBO miniseries like Sharp Objects and True Detective and addictive true crime podcasts like West Cork and Serial. I'm Conor Dowling, and this is The Chosen.
Thank you. I mean, the timing is perfect today. Owen,
Thank you.
what do you think?
Hey, Conor, how's it going?
Hi, Ian. How's it going?
I'm loving your mic there.
Oh, thanks very much.
Giving you
It's the podcast aesthetic, so thought it would be appropriate.
It's giving you a good radio voice, that's for sure.
Thanks.
I mean, like this is definitely in my territory. You know, I'm developing a couple of psychological thrillers at the moment. Not so much on the TV side. I mean, one slight concern I have is certainly limited TV series aren't as sexy to broadcasters as you may think.
Sure.
And perhaps there's something within the mythos and the cult that may give you an opportunity to broaden that into other series a little bit. Well, not so much, but you know, a little bit like I don't know, not True Detective, but Fargo
Sure.
or something like that. Where they're kind of interconnected. I really like the podcast element, but it felt underused in your pitch.
Okay.
Because it's quite a unique idea for a podcast person to kind of use that to find somewhere. But then obviously it seems to disappear when she infiltrates the cult. So does that still have a role within the story and the narrative?
Absolutely. Like, I suppose one of the reasons why I wanted her to be a podcaster is because I see that there's this really fascinating modern movement of female podcasters who are like these modern, complicated noir detectives in real life. These are real people who are following active cases. So I see her basically narrating this story while commentating on her podcast. And that gets more complicated the deeper she gets into the cult and the more she starts to, you know, drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak. Yeah, it's definitely something that I see as being involved right up to the very end. Yeah.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks. Mary Kate?
Yeah, thank you so much, Connor. Like that was really well done. And actually, I was a little anxious because I thought you were reading it, but you did such a lovely job. And I happened to glance at the clock at 60 seconds and I was like, I'm all in, and you've only been talking for 30 seconds.
Brilliant.
So yeah, that was really,
Thank you.
really well done. Same as Owen, I'm aware that limited, series may, so I just wonder, could it be a feature film? But you don't have to answer that. It's just a thought. I wonder if you know the Armistead Maupin book, The Night Listener.
I've heard of that, but I'm not
Yeah,
familiar with
it's
it
a
actually.
great movie that hardly anybody's seen, like Robin
Yeah.
Williams being serious, but have a look at it because it's similar. But I really liked actually what you said in answer to Owen's question, and
Brilliant.
you almost gave me too much plot because,
Sure.
but that's just, I was all in
Yeah.
after you've been talking for 30 seconds,
Okay.
and then I started to struggle to follow it. So
Yes.
if I were you, like, and I mean, just you don't have to do this, but what you said in answer to Owen's question about like these women podcasters who have become detectives effectively
Yeah.
because they're following a story, I'd put that in instead of giving me more
Yes.
and more and more plot, because I started to spin out wondering, how did she fake her suicide with the same DNA and da da da. So it might have been too much plot when you could have been talking more about, because that's a great answer, but it's also good, to have one in your pocket. But really well done. I found
Thanks so much. Thanks, Mary.
Okay.
That's brilliant.
Okay, Sarah.
So well done, Conor. Again, really enjoyed that. Your dulcet tone certainly helped to create this air of mystique and intrigue around it.
Thank you.
So I think that was really good. And again, like Mary Kate, I was very much drawn into it very, very quickly. Loved the hook of the podcast idea as well, and this idea of having a very strong, active female character at the center of this film. I just had a question, I suppose, around the cult and maybe some of the rules of the world around that cult, because again, that is another potentially unique selling point here. So just to kind of maybe understand that a tiny bit more, just going to huge detail, but the basic rules of the cult.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, I suppose when you say cult, it kind of can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. And I suppose one of the things I wanted to avoid was a very stereotypical bearded, long-haired leader who kind of looked like me, because that would just be too on the nose. But it's they as it stands at the moment in the story, they are masquerading as an elite self-help cult who have these basically retreats out in their secluded mansion in the countryside. But when Moya gets in there, when she gets infiltrated, she discovers that they have disturbing rituals. They're involved in emotional, financial, and sexual manipulation, and there is a sacrifice element in it as well.
Okay. So it'll be a good laugh.
Yeah.
Well, look, well done, because often, particularly when you mention, Irish, this people try to blend the kind of, I suppose, the folklore, the mythology, and sometimes that can get very grainy and dirty, and it can be hard to make everything work. So sometimes just being very straight about what it is, in itself can really help an audience grasp what you're delivering with your scripts.
Brilliant. That's
So
great
well
advice. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Conor. And I think that people, of course, are very interested into crime stories, and you always try to find different professions. You have old ladies investigating, and you have bookshop owners, and you have psychologists and pathologists, and they are all, as long as they are investigating, people are interested. And to do this here via podcast, I think it's a very contemporary and outstanding idea, and has a very good chance that people like this idea. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Now we come to the fifth. It's Sinead O'Loughlin from Middleton, and she is a writer and director. She's well educated with a BA from Dún Laoghaire and an MA in drama and theatre from NY in Galway, and she has written and directed for theatre, radio, and film. And she will introduce and pitch a documentary called A Better Forest. A Better Forest is a feature documentary focused on one woman's scientific environmental stand against Irish forestry management, which led to her arrest in 2019 and criminal conviction in 2020. So it's based on a real story. Sinead, please.
When Sinead Jones was stopped by police leaving a state-owned forest near her West Cork home last year, she was covered in sawdust and had a chainsaw in her car. She admitted to chopping down hundreds of trees and was arrested and charged with criminal damage. When asked what motivated the 61-year-old retired biochemist to risk imprisonment, Sinead replied she was creating a better forest. Ireland was once so covered in native trees like oak and ash, it was said a squirrel could travel from Malin Head to Mizen Head without touching the ground. Now, only 10% of Ireland is covered in trees, and only 1% of those are native. The rest are Sitka spruce, a non-native species planted for timber on Irish state land. So what? There's still trees, what's the difference? That's where biodiversity comes in, the delicate ecosystem that makes native forests vibrant and teeming with life. Sitka spruce plantations smother the forest bed and kill biodiversity, creating silent dead zones. Sinead was removing these spruce and replacing them with native trees because she believes citizens have an urgent duty to protect biodiversity. Scientists warn global biodiversity decline will lead to the extinction of pollinator species and the collapse of human food production. A Better Forest is a timely, engaging documentary of one woman's fight to protect the environment. It's Erin Brockovich meets the farthest. It will appeal to an increasingly environmentally aware audience with high production values to capture the natural soundscape and beauty of the forest. With our unique access to Sinead, A Better Forest will be a compelling cinematic experience.
Thank you very much, Sinead. Mary Kate, will you start?
Lovely work there, Sinead. Nice timing. You finished it bang on there, you know. If I was to give you a little tip, I'd say reverse it, because I thought, like, when you said it's Erin Brockovich, you know, meets the farthest, I was like, oh, put that right at the top, you know, because I would just be like, oh, okay, I really want to see this. I'm kind of interested in Sinead. Like, 61 is young to be retired, you know, but she's out there, like, she clearly isn't retired from life, right? So, you know, tell me more about her as a personality, and how did you meet her? Why are you attracted to this story?
Sure. So I first became aware of Sinead's court case back in October. I just saw somebody had scanned a news clipping about it to Facebook, and it was, you know, somebody related to Extinction Rebellion. And so I was just very curious about it. I just thought the story was really, really interesting. Like, she'd been doing the project for over 20 years before she got caught. She'd been going in, and it was like guerrilla, they call it rewilding. And she just was so, what I loved about it is, like, you know, obviously she's an environmental activist, but she's also a scientist, because the science is sound. And so I live in Middleton, so I found out when her court case, the presentation of the book of evidence was. So I drove to Bantry, and then because she was denying the charges, it went to trial in February of this year. So I was at the court case both days, and I got to know her better. And obviously then the world fell apart. But I reconnected with her when I was making the pitch, and just to make sure she was still on board. And yeah, just really looking forward to getting going with it, because I just think it's such a great story with such a great character. But then the wider issue, I think, is really, you know, there's a global element there, and there's a bigger audience for it.
That's fantastic. And I mean, I said this to someone else as well, but, like, again, I just feel like I want to sit down and talk to you about this for like 2 hours. So you've done a great job, right? So thanks.
This was the advantage of the live Galway Film Fleadh live, because you could do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can pick up the phone or talk on Zoom or WhatsApp. Owen, what's your opinion?
Sinead, hi, how's it going? You did a really good pitch, I felt. And the reason I feel that is because you got me right into that world, and you were able to paint a picture of your protagonist really, really quickly. So I could see it instantly. So I thought that was a really, really nice kind of pitch. I have one or two questions, and you kind of brought it up in your response to Mary Kate, which is about, using this person's story to kind of tell a greater narrative about biodiversity in the world. So what's the balance of that? I mean, in your mind, is the documentary mostly about her and her actions and her story tells us about biodiversity, or is this just a way in to kind of deal with the meat of the subject, which is that biodiversity is it's not really happening?
I would definitely see it being framed by her story, because I just think from the very start of it and just her life in West, it's just a really good kind of framing device. And I think that from the time that she was caught to the time that the court case came up, and also the outcome of the court case, I think that structurally that gives really good points to go to. I also have to allow for the fact that part of the reason that I want to is in the development. I think that'll come out in the sense of, getting to know Sinead, getting to know the area. But all in all, my sense is that Sinead's going to anchor the whole thing. Again, I think it's because she has the scientific element as well, because I've already done some homework in terms of, like, it would be very important to me. I've worked on research before for documentary theatre and for documentary before, and I'd need to have, I would want very much an advisory panel of academics who are scientists with it as well, so that it's anchored by science with the frame of Sinead's story to bring in the kind of character and the kind of colour to it. But then I just love that's what hooked me to the whole thing. Within that one story of this one woman in West Cork, taking a personal stand against a forest beside her home, it just touched on a way bigger issue that's quite relevant universally. So then I was thinking, okay, this could have an audience.
Yeah. And one quick question: what is the scientific consensus on biodiversity and her actions? I mean, is there going to be dissent within her debate?
Well, again, I'm hoping my research will everything will come out in the wash. But I mean, there's no real argument to say that, like, the real argument is kind of economic policy versus environmental policy, because there's no point as well coming at this from the point of view of, oh, we can't sow trees for timber. It's the idea that we're prioritizing economic policy and it's not paying off, and then we're sacrificing an opportunity to protect biodiversity. So, like, scientists wouldn't and that's why I like going at it from a scientific point of view as well, because I'm not a scientist. I didn't even do science in school. And when I watched The Farthest, I loved how they were able to get anybody on board with the science, because they told it through the eyes of the people who are passionate about it. And I find scientists very interesting because, they're just so in love with a very specific part of the universe, and they're just experts in it. And they can, especially in The Farthest, they can be very passionate talking about their subject. And so, like, anybody can access that in terms of cinema or documentary. So, I guess they wouldn't. The biodiversity argument is sound, but there's a politics, economic thing going on in the background as well that needs to be addressed, because that's valid too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. What do you have to add?
Well, likewise, just say congratulations, Sinead. It was a really great pitch, and again, very, very timely. You found this quite nice hook of, again, as I perceived it, but again, as you're starting to explore it more, I think you'll probably find more within it this idea of the rights of the individual versus the rights of the greater good or the common man. And, you're probably going to explore that in the idea that, the commercialization of woods and forestry and what that really means and what that means we're sacrificing. But at the end of the day, I suppose it's jobs and it's money. So you kind of got this interesting dichotomy going on there in terms of your main thematic agenda. One thing I was going to ask you was maybe about some of the other characters that might feature in the documentary. I mean, you've talked about scientists, and she's being charged. I assume there's a kind of a court case, and I assume that will hopefully be the end of your film, whether she wins or loses. But who else do you envision being in the film?
Well, I've already spoken to a couple of academics who work in there's loads of different elements to it in terms of the science of it. So there's groundwater and coniferous forests. But I am interested. I don't want to say it's going to be like everything, but you start out and you kind of go in and but I am interested in the history of the native Irish forest, so I do think that there's room there to speak to historians as well, and just to find, because the history of the native Irish woodland is really interesting, how it's the time periods it's lived through, how it's been influenced by different factors, so I think really I would have my advisory panel, and I think that through the research and development part, I think I would begin to identify the different characters who, would feature in it and who would bring those elements to it. But really, I have to say, when I talk about it, I've kind of realized that there are two characters. It's Sinead and it's the Irish forest, and I'm kind of treating them both, separately. So they both have their own individual narrative, and I think they're the most interesting characters in it.
Well, and if I may weigh in, you need the apologist for Quilcha. You need somebody like that. So you need saying, this is why what she did was wrong and why what we're doing is right.
Sure.
You'll find some tension,
And just to say that obviously with permission to film and things like that, just to, worst case scenario, if we weren't given access to particular areas of land, there's native forest on private land that we could access. There's different projects around Ireland that we can access that we've kind of looked into, because obviously without the access to these forests, the project would be hindered.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
The sixth contestant is Jennifer Davidson. She's from Dublin, and she has spent 10 years working for a number of Ireland's independent production companies, securing commissions for a wide range of programs. Currently, she's writing for Fair City. She is an experienced screenwriter, and she will present a drama called My Brilliant Embarrassing Dad. And she says in her logline, parents are an embarrassment, it comes with the territory, but when your dad has a brain injury, it takes embarrassment to a whole new level. Jennifer, please.
Thanks. So what do you do when your dad tells the postman that he's fat or takes his shirt off in the middle of mass? Welcome to Clodagh's world. You know those cool 20-something students whose life is all about taking risks? Yeah, that is totally not Clodagh. So Dad was always a joker, but since his brain injury, he has no filter. Mum is busy working double shifts in the local nursing home. Her little sister is just too young to get it. And her big brother only comes home to get his washing done and obviously to tell Clodagh everything that she's doing wrong. So Clodagh gives up her J1 summer to stay home in North Mayo, to run the family's failing seaside amusements, and to fix her dad. What could possibly go wrong? So Dad decides to reunite his old Johnny Logan tribute act. He ropes in Jamie, the cute guy next door, who is also Clodagh's secret crush. But when Dad spends all their money on white suits and music equipment, Clodagh's furious. Dad feels bad, but in the end, the Dad Rockers save the day. They save the amusements from bankruptcy. And as Dad pushes Clodagh out of her comfort zone, she learns to let go, to take risks, and maybe even to fall in love. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Sarah, will you start?
Sure. Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
Sarah.
Great hook into your premise. I liked the fact that you kind of set us up with a couple of questions. It's always a great way to grab people's attention and to pull us into the film that you're telling. It's a film, right? Or it's I didn't quite catch it. It's a film. And it's aimed at kind of, who would you say your audience are for your film?
So it's in that kind of mode of like Dumpling, I guess TV-wise, My Mad Fat Diary. So those kind of teen rom-com coming of age films.
Great. Now, I think it's a really interesting audience, and it's a genre that we haven't done a lot in Ireland. And I think it's something that we need to think about collectively as the stories that we're putting on screen and who they're directed at. So, like, enjoyed your pitch. I think there was quite a lot of plot in there, and I think you probably had an extra 10 seconds or so that you could have sold us a little bit more. But there was some lovely moments in there, so I could see Clodagh's dilemma, and I enjoyed some of those moments with her dad as well. So well done.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. And Owen?
Jennifer, how are you? Yeah, it was a good pitch, good project. It did remind me a lot of a film I was involved in a couple of years ago called Run and Jump, which I don't know if you saw. It was a film starring Will Forte and Maxine Peake, where the father of a family has a brain injury and kind of devolves back into almost being a toddler. So perhaps worth watching just to see what works and what doesn't work and how to kind of distinguish. It certainly feels that the best of the benefit this project is to ensure that people know it's a comedy. Because I think it was mentioned there was a drama. So make sure that people don't expect a drama when perhaps this feels a bit more heightened with its Johnny Logan tribute band and all that sort of stuff. Where I think this will work best, and jumping on Sarah's point, that we don't really make those kind of films, and maybe we should be making those kind of feel-good, funny films. Certainly, Dating Amber is an example that's done really well, which was able to capitalize on that. The only thing I would also say very quickly is just, Saving Amusement Parks feels a bit old now and doesn't really feel modern or that important personally. So I would see if you could find another kind of goal that might be slightly more contemporary. But besides that, I very much like the tone and I like the world. And I think it has potential to be quite commercial.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mary Kate.
Yeah, lovely work, Jennifer. And it's a pity it's not a noir because you've got some very interesting lighting happening there. But no, you're a very engaging speaker, so that's great. And I think your title communicates that it's going to be a comedy. I had a couple of questions. Like Sarah, I would just echo, and maybe it's my attention span, but there was a point where I was like, that's all the plot my head has room for. And what I wanted to know was your connection to the material. But also I zoned out. It's now when you're in the second half, it gets more difficult. Is Dad mentally ill? Because I wasn't sure if he has a bipolar disorder, or like Owen was saying, has he had a brain injury?
No, it's a brain injury. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So he's become disinhibited, right?
So he's become disinhibited. He has no filter. So, and I guess personal connections. So 6 years ago now, my own brother had a brain injury.
Okay.
And one of the biggest things was he totally lost his filter. So it's kind of like dealing with a toddler or a very drunk person all the time, where there's no filter. They see it, they think it, they say it.
Okay, so my own experience of somebody like that is that it can be screamingly funny, but it's also very painful.
Absolutely.
And I want to know that part of it as well. So that's our journey, presumably, so, and for that reason, I might just take brilliant out of the title. I think it would be My Embarrassing Dad, because if you say brilliant, I already know she likes him as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Anyway, that's a tiny note, but just, it's a really great pitch. It's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thanks.
Good luck. Now the 7th, Brian McEntire from Dublin. And he's a journalist. He has an MA in screenwriting. He has written quite a few scripts. And his project is called Riptide. It's a drama, a mystery drama, about a journalist attempts to find out the truth about a young woman's death after he inadvertently reopens old wounds, puts his own life at risk, and threatens to tear a community apart. So it's really a Greek tragedy. Will you start, please, Brian?
Okay, thanks. Sorry. How far would you go to atone for having hurt somebody really badly? Riptide is a drama mystery set in Salthill, County Galway. And Riptide is a metaphor. Thematically, it's about the ripples from the choices we make and the lies we can never shake that come back like a dangerous aftercurrent, like a riptide, and pull you back into the sea. And our lead character is Dan Fogarty. He's a regional reporter in his 30s and also in a career rut. He's on the outs with his father because he blames him for not telling him early enough about his late mother's terminal illness. So one day he's asked to write a story about the grieving process. And he focuses on this young woman, Deirdre O'Dwyer, who was killed in a car crash, aged 22. Deirdre's father opens up to Dan, but Deirdre's mother didn't hear about the story, and it's partly Dan's fault. So she blames him for reopening old wounds. Word spreads fast about Dan's mistake, and so feeling remorseful and basically feeling kind of worthless as a journalist, he discovers that there's a discrepancy in the official accounts of how she died. So to make amends with the mother, he investigates further, and he discovers a web of deceit and lies within the community. And he also sees that what he thought was a local story has much more national implications, major implications.
Sarah, you are based in Galway. You know Salt Hill, so please start.
I don't know, why is it when everybody crosses the Shannon they get killed? I don't know what that is. Well done, Brian. Great. Again, really good pitch. Again, I love the fact that you opened it with kind of statements or questions that pulled us right into your world. And obviously, you set Dan up particularly well as a character. We kind of understand the point where he is in his life. We kind of understand the dilemma that he's facing. And again, you don't focus too much on plot, again, which kind of helps kind of build the intrigue and the mystery and wants us to ask more questions. So I think you did really well there in terms of your pitch. My question to you, I suppose, is just what is at stake for Dan really as he goes on this journey? Because I'm just trying to figure that out.
Well, he's just feeling professionally kind of spent, and he's in a career rut. And if I'm honest, it's based on something that happened to me when I was an intern in Little Rock, Arkansas at the Associated Press. And I was doing a story about this young man who was killed in a car crash. And it was in the paper, a few days later. And I talked to the family, but I'd never heard that there was a step family involved as well. And they were really upset. So I was upset as a result. And one of my colleagues said, it's not entirely your fault, whatever. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to explore how would you atone for something like that, and kind of almost for therapy for myself, Sorry.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mary Kate?
Yeah, hi, Brian. Lovely to see you there. You know what you just said to Sarah is how you should start this pitch, and like that could be true for a lot of the pitches, also Sinead, when she started talking about her personal connection to her project, and it would make it like, although you did a beautiful job, and I love your metaphor, that was lovely, of a riptide that pulls you back in when you're trying to move forward. But like my note to myself was like, when I worked at newspapers, journalists were so hard bitten, like, remorse didn't enter into it. So your personal connection to that when you were a rookie and your colleagues were going, never mind, don't bother. But you were like, no, you still actually had some humanity left. Like it's a really, really interesting story. So I would have loved to have heard that. But look, this is how pitches work. There's a bit of back and forth for it as well. So thank you so much. Great work.
Thank you, Mary Kate. Owen?
Brian, hey, how's it going? So yeah, it's it was a good pitch. I totally agree with Mary Kate, and she stole my good feedback, which is using that personal element there, because it just, you invest in you as a writer as much as the story. But going back to Sarah's point, the slight advice I would give is you could push your main character Dan a bit more. One of my favorite films of all time is Ace in the Hole. And, it's a great story about journalistic integrity or lack thereof. So you could probably make Dan a little bit less likable, actually, and give him a greater journey to go on and a bigger realization to make. And I think then your story might pop a little bit more. But besides that, I thought it was a really good pitch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you. Thank you. Now we come to a writing team, Ross White and Tom Berkeley, but Ross is the one pitching. Ross and Tom, they started to write together in 2014, and they wrote mostly for theater. but in 2019 they started also to write screenplays and write for the screen. And they are from Belfast in Northern Ireland. The project title is Songbird. It's a drama which deals also with music. Entangled in the tribal violence of an East Belfast council estate, the wayward young man's extraordinary musical ability offers him a way out. We look forward to hear how this works.
Songbird is the belated coming-of-age tale of John Joe, a young man caught up in the violent new wave paramilitary culture of his East Belfast council estate. But behind closed doors, John Joe is a gifted, self-taught musician with a remarkable talent as a folk singer-songwriter. And when his gift is discovered by an unlikely ally, John Joe secretly enters Belfast's trad music scene, where the beauty and honesty of his original songs see him flourish. He falls in love with Sarah, a young Asian-Irish violinist who champions his musical ambitions, but soon the toxic tribalism and xenophobic actions of his peer group threaten everything. The suicide of his best friend sees John Joe relapse to his old lifestyle, turning his back on his relationship and his music. With nowhere left to hide, will John Joe silence his gift, or will he decide he has something worth singing about? In Songbird, we want to marry the grit of social realism with the poetic beauty of folk music. It's Calm with Horses meets Inside Llewyn Davis. This Is England meets Once. Good Will Hunting with Matt Damon on guitar and Ben Affleck in the Orange Order. But imagine a soundtrack composed by a Laura Marling or a Damien Rice, underscoring an overlooked corner of Irish cinema. The working class, unionist experience, warts and all. You know, Tom Waits said, folk music is beautiful melodies telling us terrible things. And that's what Songbird is. It's the story of a beautiful gift trying to survive in a troubled world.
Thank you, Ross.
Thank you.
Very good. Owen.
Ross, congratulations. That was an excellent pitch. I think, you know, music is so powerful and often underutilized in cinema. And I think you found a really, really interesting way of dealing with the Troubles, you know, and using the same kind of dramatic tension that you see, but giving it a fresh coat of paint by using music and trad. And all those references you gave are really interesting and actually quite spot on. Where's the story end for you, and what do you want it to say about the world?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Owen. It's I guess it's a journey piece, a character study of John Joe and his sort of his track of, it's that question of will he embrace this potential and sort of rise above the kind of where he's from and the sort of lifestyle he's part of. For me, it comes from a very sort of personal place. I was in a terrible punk band, to be honest, when I was younger, and it kind of was about what music does for you. As a young person, it's the sort of aspiration and the dream to climb out and beyond. And I think that both looking back and in the present day, like it's about the way paramilitary culture works in East Belfast and in council estates. I think so many young people get really caught up in that. And this is about sort of the decision for somebody with as I say, a remarkable talent, that sort of gift that's been almost bestowed upon him, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess his final question is, does he rise above it? Does he move on from it? And that sort of the balance of the movie is putting him in predicaments where he's got to make that choice, you know?
Okay, thanks.
Sarah, what do you think?
I think your abilities as wordsmiths definitely came through there, Ross, and your background in theatre certainly came through. I mean, some of those, I was writing them down feverishly going, oh my God, I should remember that, you know? So congratulations on some of that. And you've managed to pull in all the kind of classical elements of cinema into a lovely pitch, beat music, a political backdrop, a coming of age, you know, an interesting central character. I think you probably could have brought John Joe out a little bit more in your pitch, you know, the obstacles that are in his way. I mean, you kind of, you drop in a couple of bits about his best friend and his love interest. And obviously that this is just a 90-second pitch. So, you know, we got a flavour of all the things that are going on there. I don't really have any kind of big comments because I think I was so satisfied by the story that you told that I just kind of want to hear more. So I would say kind of a big congrats. Yeah, I really enjoyed that pitch, and I kind of got a great sense of the story that you're trying to tell and your world and the flavor and the sounds, which are very important as well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Mary Kate?
Yeah, Ross, I'll just echo what the others have said. That was a really professional pitch, and like when you're pitching in the future, you can go as personal as you like. It was lovely when you said, I was honestly a terrible punk rock band. The one note that I do have, and just like agreeing with my colleagues, you've done a bang up job, but the one question that I have is, where is the struggle for the character? I mean, I know that there's there's tribalism versus realizing your talent, but as an audience member, I'm just going to go, well, realize your talent. Don't go into, paramilitary violence. There's no question for me. But I was thinking of something like Billy Elliot. So in Billy Elliot, you've got well, should you allow people to tell you, ballet is gendered and, you're just a little girl? No, you shouldn't. But the most heartbreaking scene in Billy Elliot is when, in order for him to realize his dreams, his father's going to break a strike. And that's when you go, oh, actually, no. So what I want to see is that the setup is not versus realizing your talent, which of course you should do, and going into violence, which of course you shouldn't do. So I'm wondering if there, and I mean, Inside Llewyn Davis is a really interesting comparison, because I was talking about this with a friend of mine who is a musician, and saying at the end of Inside Llewyn Davis, I don't know if he really had enough talent to make it. Now, that's not where you're going. Your guy is touched by the hand of God and he's amazingly talented. But what could possibly put me as an audience member in tension, going, no, following your career is the wrong thing to do here?
Yes, yeah, sure. If I
That's the question I'd ask you, I guess.
Sure. I think that was a massive question for us as well, because otherwise, you're right, it just becomes frustrating. Go for it, man. What's your problem? So where we're at with that, obviously, as I say, 90 seconds there. Didn't get this in, but a major relationship in this film is with John Joe and his older brother.
Mm-hmm.
And they have this sort of relationship where the brother is kind of at the center of this paramilitary culture, and John Joe has sort of become the sort of unofficial paternal figure to his brother's child, who is a 7-year-old girl, and he feels a massive sort of that's really holding him, and he feels like a real responsibility with that. Similarly, his relationship with his mother, he doesn't have a father figure himself. His relationship with his mother, she struggles with alcoholism. So he feels like he is the man sort of holding this household together, as it were. And he knows that it's part of this sort of repressed community where to pursue his own ambitions and his own dreams would be selfish almost. That is one side of it. And then there's also, as you said, the Billy Elliot kind of side of it, of the sort of softness of folk music against the sort of abrasive nature of him as a character, and his violence. It's in the same kind of Calm with Horses way, where it's sort of, you've got that character Arm, who's a really sort of brutal character. John Joe is dragged into that world, so they really clash with each other. So I guess he's got the responsibility in his home life, and then also sort of that juxtaposition, if that answers you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Very much, Ross. Thank you. The 9th contestant is Thomas Ryan from Belfast, and he has written feature films, Trampoline, Twice Shy, and he's also writing an online series for the BBC Bite Size. His project title is Fred and Ginger. It's a comedy. Fred and Ginger, the comedy of age, comedy set in contemporary Ireland. The story revolves around a disadvantaged teenager called Lennox, who befriends Maya, a young woman living in a direct provision center, and they want to run away together. Please, Thomas.
Hello, I'm here to pitch my next feature as a writer-director, Fred and Ginger. I'm looking to team up with the right production company to help me make this happen. I see this as a crowd-pleasing commercial comedy in the vein of The Commitments meets Billy Elliot. The film centers on Lennox, who is a teenager of color who yearns to escape his current difficult situation that he's living in. He dreams of running away and becoming a dancer. The only problem is Lennox can't dance. He comes across an ad for a talent show, which has a life-changing cash prize. He decides to enter, but in order to do so, he needs a dance partner. So he puts an ad out, which reads, "Fred seeks his ginger." He's stunned when Maya, an asylum seeker from Direct Provision, auditions for him and blows him away with her tap dancing skills. Despite their differences culturally, despite their different skill sets, interference from bullies, rival dancers, they manage to believe in each other, they believe in themselves, they train as much as they can, they make it, they barely scrape through to the final by falling upwards. They wow the audience, but unfortunately don't win because of the judges' private prejudices against them. I think that this movie is a special movie that will celebrate our differences. It'll showcase diversity in Ireland, the best upcoming talent that we have. It'll make audiences laugh, cry. I just think it's going to be a great project and need to find the right people to get involved.
Thank you, Thomas. Mary Kate.
Yeah, everybody did really, really well with the timing. Well done. So I was really, really engaged in that, you know, and Fred Seeks His Ginger is just gorgeous. And yeah, I love the idea, like, you know, of celebrating diversity, especially, you know, we make films for an international audience, but they still think that we live in the quiet man era, you know, so I love that idea of those stories. I had one question, which is like, if he can't dance, like, you know, does she teach him to dance, or do they figure out a way of dancing where she's doing all the flashy stuff and he's just holding her? Or yeah, so like how does that work?
Yeah, she just unlocks that belief that he needs to have in himself. So his family, his friends, people in school, everyone puts him down because he's different. He wants to dance. No one believes in him. So I think that always affected him, and he believes that he can't dance until he meets Maya, and then she brings it out in him.
And how old are they?
It'd be 16.
Okay. Did you say that?
No, so I don't know.
Then tell us that up top, because I was wondering how old he was. But I guess they were young. That's brilliant. Really nice work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Kate. Sarah?
Hi, Thomas. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Again, really lovely pitch. I mean, tonally very attracted to this project again, because it's that more light-hearted type of fare, which I kind of do think we should be making a little more of. And I think particularly as we move out of this pandemic, I think audiences may move towards kind of more light-hearted entertainment fare, you know, with a very powerful message at the centre of it. I think audiences will start to seek that kind of material out. I might be wrong. I'm not very good at predicting trends. I have two questions, actually. One is, I suppose, what has inspired this material for you, or, you know, where did you find this story? And the other is the kind of conflict that Lennox and Maya have, because generally in these kind of stories, there's a moment where they're pulled apart and have to come back together again. So what is that conflict for them?
Sure. Well, what made me want to make this movie was just the fact that I want to have something to say. I think so much work goes into making any movie that it has to say something. And I think that making a story about believing in yourself, realizing your full potential, I think that's very important. I think if I could do that in a way that I can incorporate dance numbers, musical numbers, even better. So I think that I just want to make something commercial, something crowd-pleasing, that has a relevant message at the center of it. So that was the genesis of this. And I think that given the current climate as well, I think it's important that we have the characters be from underrepresented backgrounds and shine a light on that, so we can hopefully start a conversation in a compassionate light about these sort of sensitive societal issues that are happening at the moment. In terms of the crux at the end of the second act, that would be when they lose towards the end of the second act, they would lose the competition. I want them to lose the competition because the judges are a little bit racist. They've got that against them. They don't want to give it the cash prize, to people from that background. So then the third act, Lennox tries to find a way to get the two of them to escape their current situation. But it ends with Maya telling him that, look, they have each other now. They have friends. in each other that they didn't have at the start of the movie. That's enough, and this is the start of their journey. You know, so long as they're together, they can kind of get through anything, and so long as they keep dreaming, they can get through anything.
Thank you very much, Owen.
Yeah, Thomas, how are you? I mean, I think you're ticking a lot of the right boxes here in terms of just, you know, finding ways to address, you know, major issues, but in a kind of a nice, warm way. And again, you know, you don't see a huge amount of cinema coming out of Ireland that does that yet. So there was lots of lovely things. It reminded me a little bit of the Silver Linings Playbook, which is a film that deals with mental health, kind of, but you know, uses a kind of the structure of a dance to bring two disparate people together. I think the idea of loss is important, and you definitely emphasize that, but in your pitch, you should be emphasizing the gain as well, which is what you just said to Sarah, which is, yes, they lost the competition, but in a way, it shouldn't really be about the competition. It should be about how they change and the friendship they find along the way. And I think that's really important. So I would just suggest inserting that a little bit into your pitch.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Thomas.
Thank you.
The last contestant, Sarah Fenelon from Enniskerry. She has written a feature animation and also a TV pilot, and she hopes this will be produced. Her project title is Darlington Academy for Young Girls, and it's a horror film. It's a horror movie. After learning what's happening behind closed doors, Ellery must stay alive long enough to plot an escape from her new school. Sarah, let us shiver.
All right, hello everyone. So Darlington Academy for Girls is an all-female prison break story that follows two sisters plot their escape from boarding school with life and death stakes. Based on a visceral nightmare I had the night before my 28th birthday. This is Suspiria meets Shawshank Redemption, and it's about the ultimate Achilles heel to power, blood. You see, Darlington Academy is no ordinary school. Behind closed doors, a dangerous program of indoctrination is taking place, and the Order are brainwashing girls in the masses with their National Socialist ideology. Sound far-fetched? Hitler wouldn't think so. We first meet Ellery on her first day of school. She's 14 and terrified, but she's not alone. Her older sister, Tori, also goes to Darlington and has a plan to get them both out. Now, a key component to the story is the unique layout of the school inside. Designed like a labyrinth that draws you farther and farther inside, the school is made up of layers. The first is called the innocent, which is where Ellery resides. Once proven guilty, you move to the sinful, followed by the disciplinary, followed by punishment. Finally, at its core is the center, and only a handful of students have ever survived. Tori is one of them. The catch, the only way out is through. So in the finale, the girls are forced to face the ultimate punishment and fight one another to the death. Tori takes her own life to save her sister, allowing Ellery to escape at last. Darlington Academy is a horror film whose horror lies in the nature of what's happening as much as how it happened.
Thank you, Sarah. It's amazing. You all make it in exactly 90 seconds. Sarah, to the next Sarah. What do you think?
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for that. Very fascinated by that, actually. It's very interested to kind of figure out the matrix of the rules of this world.
Yeah.
You did a good job of trying to sell that to us, but also giving us enough room to maybe ask lots of questions and try to figure out the machinations of this world with you. Again, love the fact that it's kind of an all-female cast as well, or ensemble cast, but based on your pitch. And obviously horror is such a commercial genre right now. I definitely think we need more women writing horror as well to bring a different point of view into that world. So I think there's lots of really great selling points there. I suppose I wonder why you went for that age range within your characters. Is it is that a reflection of the audience you hope to attract to the film, or is that obviously it's a kind of a coming of age story as well, and it's a, you know, boarding or a school set story? That was one question I had, and the other question was, why would parents send their kids to this school?
Yeah, totally. That's one of the first questions I'm always asked with this story.
Damn, I'm not that original.
Yeah. And I was inspired, I suppose, that this is an anxiety dream sort of gone wrong. But one of the things that inspired it is Hitler's youth and my fascination with what was happening in Germany at the time. And there's actually a female version of Hitler's Youth, which was called the Brigade of German Women, which people are less familiar with. And one of the reasons that everyone didn't mind sending their children to that was because it was an honor, and parents were delighted that their child had been selected. So this is almost like a privilege. This is a privilege to be picked. And the fact that two girls from the same family got into this school is amazing. So that's one of the reasons. Then I suppose with the age range, it goes back to the photos that I have seen of Hitler's Youth. And I wanted to set this in a boarding school, but it's more like a state penitentiary than it is a regular school. And the layers of are almost like levels. If this was a game, the girls have to get past each level in order to get to the center so that they can get out. And so I wouldn't say that it's for a 14-year-old audience. I think this is an older audience that is going to be quite terrified. But yeah, it is that coming of age, sort of two sisters bonding, like a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old coming together to take on corruption.
Great, thank you.
You're asking me? So sorry. That was my phone. I'm so sorry if that threw you off, Sarah. You did a great job, and it's a really original idea. Going to boarding school was one of the most traumatic things that ever happened to me, and I don't actually mean that as a joke, you know. And I think it's really interesting. You started beautifully saying that, like, it was this dream that you had. I would be interested in exploring, actually, you know, the metaphor of it. That, like, when you go to a very posh boarding school, you're sort of being molded to be a particular thing that serves society. So male or female, you're being fed into. But the payoff is that you make all these good connections, and you know you're going to be privileged as you enter adulthood. But it's stolen. Like, one of the things that really shocked me about boarding school was how these young women, I was 16 and so were they, were already like snobs, you know, and they were already like really big into, you know, party politics and things like that. And I was like, why aren't you socialists? You know, why don't you want to change the world? You know, and, you know, there were 16-year-olds who wanted fur coats and a ring on their finger. And I was like, I want a string of lovers to, you know, travel the world. So I'd be interested in that aspect of it when Sarah asks, what's the payoff, you know, in going to these schools, like, you know. So that's just the bit that, and again, I got a tiny bit, it jolted me when you said, does this sound unlikely? Hitler wouldn't think so. I was just like, oh. So I think the way you answered Sarah's question was better, you know, saying, you know, I got interested, I had this anxiety dream, but I think the germ of the idea was, again, so like, but it's like, if you sell your soul, what do you get for it? You know, like, and this is a literal version of that. And I really like the idea of like that. The worst thing that could happen is they have to fight each other to the death, right?
Yeah.
But again, I would love to sit down and talk to you about your project for 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's meaty.
Thank you. Owen.
Hi, Sarah, Kate. I mean, I really like horror generally, and I very much like elevated horror. And I'll ask you two questions. And the first is what type of horror this is, because this could be comedy horror, it could be satirical, or it could be blood and guts kind of, you know, very, very straight horror, or it could be something more elevated where you play with class. And I wasn't quite sure where it quite landed there, so it's worth bearing that in mind. And the other question I had is, it seems that your protagonist was Ellery, right? But I didn't get a sense of her. I think you moved on to the sister a bit more. So I'm kind of curious about what her journey is throughout the story.
Okay, great. Well, so in terms of horror, I see this more as like a suspense-driven horror with as much of the horror goriness happening off screen as possible, probably up until the climax of the film. Something like Get Out or Us or Suspiria, which I find terrifying up until the last sort of 15 minutes, is very suspense driven. Ellery is the younger, obviously, sister, and very much looks up to Victoria. kind of get her out. But the thing that I was really interested in exploring is this idea of family sacrifice and like what you're willing to do for your parents. Are you willing to stand in front of a bullet for your siblings or your friends? And I find that it's that their bond and their sibling relationship is what is going to ultimately undermine this sort of tyrannical school and get the word out of what's actually happening there. So yeah, they're at each layer that they get through in the process. I want the character development and their relationship to be kind of uncovered in a new way. So yeah, that's.
Got it.
Thank you very much. We have to wrap up. This was a great session with great projects. I thank the judges. I thank the technical team. I thank Annette for all the preparation. And I want to say to the contestants that it's really the taking part is what counts. And our experience is that in the last years in the audience, we always had producers and distributors and broadcasters and people from film funds. And that's why it might happen that somebody will approach you. They will talk to Annette or me, and we give them your email, will approach you because your project might fit into the slate or into slots. It's not all about winning, but tonight at the Fleadh's closing event, we will tell you who the winner is. And I can only say, I hope we will all meet in person next year, live at the Galway Film Fleadh, maybe in a bit better world. And you know, we can't simulate the rowing club and all the little interactions there virtually. All the best, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Thank you. Great work, whoever did the selection. Those were fantastic projects.